Final countdown.
Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome to what is the penultimate session of this conference. We're coming together for our capstone to talk about PPP projects for disaster reduction. And over the course of the next hour and a half together, or 90 minutes, we're going to be talking about how, with global losses and damages from disasters increasing, developing and least developed countries are most affected by these natural disasters. They have limited resources to respond, and so we're asking the question, how can public-private partnerships increase adaptation capacity? This session is going to focus on innovative PPPs to increase resilience while adapting and strengthening coastal economies in this new reality. I'm your moderator and host for this session, Beth Gibbons. I'm the Executive Director at the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, a North American network dedicated to connecting and supporting climate adaptation and resilience professionals so that we can all accelerate our work, frame it in justice and equity, and ensure that we are responding to the pressing impacts of climate change across all sectors and industries. I'm honored to be joined for this session by David Dodd, CEO of International Sustainable Resilience Center, Calandra Cruikshank, CEO of Statebook International, and Juan Bauza, the Economic Resilience Director for the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Over the course of our time together, we're going to hear first from David a little bit about the PPP landscape and how this case study fits into the arc of the World Association of Public-Private Partnership Professionals work. We're going to talk about some problem setting, really getting to understand the stage and what is happening across Puerto Rico, have the opportunity to learn from Juan and Calandra how their work has started together. And then we're going to be hearing about the solution sets that have come forward through their collaboration. We're going to have a debrief with David. I'm going to have the opportunity to ask some questions, and then I encourage you all to use the Q&A function to send questions in as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go through and share with you the bios of our incredible speakers that are with us for this session, and then we'll be opening it over to David. So I'll read David's first. I'm also going to go ahead through Juan's and Calandra's, so you'll hear everybody at the top so that we don't need to take any pauses and can stay straight into the action once we get our speakers going. So David Dodd is an international expert in economic development, climate adaptation, and PPPs. In his 20-plus year background in development finance and economic development, he served as Dean of the University of Oklahoma Economic Development Institute and was founding chairman of the Resilience Development Institute. Since entering climate resilience 17 years ago, David has directed climate adaptation efforts on 4 continents. Most recently, he served as a subject matter expert contractor to the U.S. Economic Development Administration economic recovery efforts in Puerto Rico. Juan Bauza is the U.S. Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration representative for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Currently in Hurricane Maria post-disaster recovery, he also serves as the field coordinator for the Economic Resilience Support Function in Puerto Rico under the National Disaster Recovery Framework. He led the team drafting the economic recovery courses of action in the PR Economic Recovery Plan, and he has actively engaged and led transformational economic development initiatives, including negotiating a historic MOU between the University of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, designing the methodology, and led the implementation of the first economic development district for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And Calandra Cruikshank is the founder and CEO of Statebook International. It's the premier provider of location intelligence for strategic economic insights powered by data science to inform the optimal locations for real estate investment and economic growth. In this dynamic role, Calandra supports Fortune 500 corporations, developers, lenders, investors with data-driven risk analysis, labor assessments, and real-time mobility insights to eliminate the market trends. Calandra is dedicated to promoting thought leadership and innovative disruptive technologies, tackling diversity, and empowering women in the industry. She previously served on the board of directors for the International Economic Development Council and chaired the Women in Prop Tech's New York City chapter. So, prepare to learn and to really have the honor of being together with this terrific group of people who are each experts in their own right. And I have already learned so much through the preparation of our sessions because of the woven work that they have done together. And so, with that, David, I am going to hand it over to you to give us some framing for this session and really understand what sets the PPP that we're going to be hearing about in Puerto Rico apart from perhaps some of the other conversations that have come earlier during this conference.
Thank you so much, Beth, and I really appreciate your taking time out of your very busy schedule to prepare for and moderate this session. Puerto Rico is really a unique situation, but it's not uncommon among island nations that all face difficulties due to climate change. Puerto Rico was struck in the late part of 1917 with two almost back-to-back hurricanes, Irma and Maria. Irma skirted the island, did some damage, but Maria went all the way through Puerto Rico. And actually, Puerto Rico is three islands, but the main island is the one that has most of the population. And it was severely damaged. The entire power grid was knocked out. And many businesses were and homes were damaged. So in response to that, through the United States Federal Emergency Management Authorities Economic Recovery Support Function, one of 6 recovery support functions under a national framework, we were called in to help restore Puerto Rico's economy. Well, that economy had already been battered because of events that had occurred decades ago, wherein Puerto Rico went on a journey to become industrialized. And in doing so, left its agricultural and ocean economy behind. And through a series of incentives, lured many industries there. And then when some of those incentives were legislated away, a lot of those industries left. So Puerto Rico had been in a recession for many years before Irma and Maria hit. And when we realized what had happened, and Juan Baza, who is from Puerto Rico, but has had a wide variety of experience. The thing about Juan that's amazing is he combines public administration, business acumen, and the best thing is his training in biology. So he recognized that a new ecosystem needed to be created. And in doing so, and looking at the ocean economy, which was ripe for development and being re-energized, along with the need to protect Puerto Rico's built environment through strengthening of coastal resilience assets. He set out to form a really new type of public-private partnership, and it's multifaceted. So you have public-private partnerships now between the federal government through Economic Development Administration, private nonprofit organizations that he has worked very hard to build capacity for entrepreneurship and innovation in. And also partnering with the government of Puerto Rico, who owns obviously the offshore assets, including coral reefs, which really protect, and forming a partnership with nonprofits, between the nonprofit, especially one nonprofit organization, and Juan will explain all this, and the government of Puerto Rico for restoration of coral and other resilience assets. And in doing so, this is the added benefit. And again, I think what sets this apart, this is a PPP that not only helps strengthen infrastructure, but also it is an economic development initiative that can create jobs in a wide variety of areas. And Juan will explain some of those things as he comes on. And to me, it's revolutionary. There's a lot of talk now about public-private partnerships to develop green infrastructure, blue infrastructure. But Juan's approach, again, is unique because of the multifaceted way in which he's gone about it. So it really is transformational recovery. And I give him all the credit for coming up with this really unique structure and ecosystem that involves, again, a series of public-private partnerships. Some, as we say, hard public-private partnerships, which are the infrastructure itself, but also soft public-private partnerships, which are programmatic but have no less effect. And so, with that, Beth, I'll let Juan take it and talk about the background and what he's done, which, in my opinion, is amazing.
Awesome. So excellent. Thanks, David, so much for giving us that framing. And we're going to kick it over now to Juan and Calandra to start us off by giving us this problem statement and setting the stage. So, Juan, to you first.
Thank you. And thank you, David. And Calandra, hi. And thanks, everybody, for being part of this. One of the interesting things that the disasters have is it has a silver lining, and it's the recovery. It's where do we go future facing. We have this reset button. It's totally unconventional, and it's not something that anybody wants, but sometimes it's needed. Not necessarily because we're on the wrong track, but maybe because we have the wrong direction in a future facing scenario. In Puerto Rico, like David said, we had a situation with Irma, and Maria basically knocked it out of the park. But it allowed us to rethink where do we want this economy to go. And we had a huge task from U.S. Department of Commerce with making a transformational recovery rather than putting back into pre-disaster conditions. So one of the key components that we need to assess is, number one, it's all about the team, the people that come together and redesign the structure. It's not necessarily, it's like a startup. When you look at the team that has the vision, the team that does the development, and the team that does the steady state operation, there are three different mindsets. In our case, we had to look at this from a, like David said, in a staged, structured, phased-in manner. One of the biggest challenges that we had was data. It was either outdated, it was non-reliable, and it was non-existent in some cases. So one of the key components that we had to go ground truth. Maybe the data was saying something, but when you went boots on the ground, the scenario was totally different. And communities are always your first point of contact. So the communities will also tell you, hey, that did not work because of A, B, and C. So when you have data that it's not reliable, you have a lot of recovery infrastructure. And when I say recovery infrastructure, I say the recovery team, the people, the companies, the contractors, basing their decisioning, very well intended, on data, but the data is wrong. So the solutions are not going to match that component. So we decided to go and we did the ground truthing. We assessed the future facing opportunities, and we analyzed how do we de-risk this opportunity to reposition this launch pad or this sandbox and go where nobody had gone before and rethink the approach from a strategic implementation. And I have to emphasize that implementation strategy. Not only put ink on paper and draft a aspirational plan, but actually start executing the foundational elements that make possible those big investments. And one of the greatest things that we had was linking up with a Statebook and Calandra, because it allowed us to rethink measuring what matters. Were we using the right data? How could we improve the data points? How could we make it more real time rather than a decade ago data set that basically was telling a different story? And not only telling a different story, the framework that we had was not measuring the opportunities that we had future facing. So based on those scenarios, we looked at the blue economy or the ocean economy as one of those huge opportunities of untapped territory, a place where we could develop a niche and spearhead economic development, but we cannot do that just from the private sector, or we cannot do that just from the government sector, and none the least, the nonprofit sector. So we see all the opportunities of impact investment, the ESGs, specifically the SDG 14. And we looked at, all right, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of projects. But what is actually happening from a commercialization standpoint, from a growth economy standpoint? And we basically looked at how does the NGO sector play a key component as an enabler. We had government as a facilitator, you have nonprofits as an enabler, and then you have the private sector as the implementer. And obviously, we needed a foundation to set this up, so we partner up with Blue Tide Puerto Rico, a nascent stage NGO, which allowed us to look at this from a hub standpoint. We were not looking at something to focus on, let's say, fisheries. We were not focused on research academic. We were not focused on hazard mitigation. So we were focused on how do we create a hub that facilitates and enables all those sectors in an even plane. So Blue Tide was kind of one of those really interesting NGOs that basically were not meant to be the implementer, was meant to be the enabler. So here comes the nonprofit with federal government support to basically set the foundation and create the bridges to be able to create those de-risk or risk reduction elements for the private sector to engage. What's even more incredible about the process that we've been engaged with, it's the fact that the nonprofit sector needs a certain level of capacity that mirrors the capacity of the private sector. So we need the project management capability. We need the program management capability, the post-award management. And we need to bring new, again, de-risking. We need to diversify the portfolio so that we have different players, which also allow access to different funding sources. So by doing this, we're able to look at this as a, like David said, my academic background is in biology. Look at this from a real ecosystem standpoint. You have the predators, you have the grazers, you have all these elements in the ecosystem that we need to maintain on an equilibrium. So by not focusing on a single particular problem, we were able to look at a solution that's made up of multiple players, and we need to distribute that public-private partnership across the living organism. So the result that we have today is that we have been able to create the credibility that this works. One of the key components of 4 years, or let's say 5 years post-disaster, we have tangible results. We have a momentum that it's gaining traction, and we're looking at a lot of engagements from the private sector, from the nonprofit sector, and from the government. So I don't know, Calandro, do you want to add up and to the data component of how this basically translates into impact rate of return and all those little pieces?
Sure, happy to. Thank you, Juan. Yeah, so I think just to add quickly onto what you were just explaining, so Statebook, my company, we work with economic development organizations and groups all across the United States, and rarely have we seen such an incredibly holistic approach to economic recovery. And I almost feel like economic recovery, while of course it is that, is almost understating what it is that is being built here, because it truly is, as David and Juan alluded to in the beginning, it's leapfrogging where Puerto Rico was pre-disaster to the future, to future-proofing where Puerto Rico wants to be. And so creating that ecosystem is incredibly powerful. And the fact that you've taken such both data-driven, absolutely, approach to doing so, but also creating that holistic ecosystem with all of the different players, from addressing the needs of local fishermen and small sole proprietorships to creating a foundation for entrepreneurship that can live long past this particular project and what is occurring on the ground now, to actually building the capacity from the inside out by engaging nonprofit organizations and training them to support the businesses in the region. It's really a remarkable project. And on the data side, what Puerto Rico has achieved is establishing a baseline for data that is specifically looking at all of the both federal and local information. And as Juan pointed out, occasionally Puerto Rico, the federal government doesn't always compile the data for Puerto Rico the same as it does for the mainland US. And so there are unique challenges to understanding what is happening on the ground and to having updated information. And so we've done some very creative approaches, both in benchmarking the baseline and creating that foundation across what industries exist today in Puerto Rico, where people are employed, what degrees are being graduated, what is the socioeconomic state and demographic state of the population and the workforce, and how can we impact that going forward, but also pulling in very creative strategies like benchmarking what other economies have achieved in similar types of ecosystem and capacity building, and then understanding how Puerto Rico can leverage its own assets on the ground to achieve similar or even better results. And building the industries from the inside out, working with across the ecosystem of all of the different players, as Juan mentioned, is really important. But being able to track and measure that transparently is something that very few governments are doing. And certainly Puerto Rico has not traditionally been known for that. So the transparency that is being enabled through authentic data collection that is public facing now through Southern Puerto Rico's digital CEDS, Digital Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, which is online at spred.com, which you can track their progress and their strategic plan on that website. And then you can also, we're standing up a website that will be specifically about this project and incorporates not only statebook data, which is all fully transparently sourced for Puerto Rico specifically, but then also integrating Howard Buffett and global impacts, impact rate of return, which is a proprietary algorithm and structure framework for measuring the progress and tracking the progress of any given project across both functions of quality of impact delivered, and then also the amount of money spent to deliver it. And so impact rate of return and enabling that type of a tool to transparently tell investors that are interested in helping Puerto Rico achieve its next level. This type of data framework is incredibly powerful for really understanding the impact that is being delivered on the ground and how that can help shape the future of the economy.
So I really appreciate getting to hear this kind of framing and the unique themes that were coming out. We're going to have an opportunity for moderated Q&A, and just to let you know, some of the questions that I have is, transferability, transformation, trust building, these kind of incredible themes that seem to really underlie what's been the success that you've shared with so many others in this team. I wonder if now we could turn to how the setting that we've had, how these pieces that have been put in place have really taken challenges to solutions. And what have those solutions look like? Maybe introducing that unique role. I know we've introduced some, but the role that the EDA in Puerto Rico has been playing, and where the doing and implementing is visible on the ground, and then where are we going from here? And so for that one, I'm going to send it back to you to start us off, and then Calandra to continue telling us about how the dynamism of the data that you're using is supporting that. And then we're, of course, going to talk about replicability, right? Because everybody wants to learn the stories, but stories are good, but more stories are better. So Juan, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. One of the, I would say the cornerstones of our strategic design was scalability from the get-go. Number one, is this the problem that we want to address? Is it just a problem for Puerto Rico? Is this an internal story that only Puerto Rico relates to, and it's not scalable? The reality is that we live in a global community, and climate, it's a global issue. We have a situation in Puerto Rico is that we are an island. We can't think of the island as a continent or look at the problems of the continent as the problems of the island, but we need to look at the problems as a whole. What is our role to this global solution? So from that standpoint, one of the key components of how we moved forward was acknowledging that whatever we built had to be implementable in coastal communities around the world. So with that in mind, what we framed was, let's look at how we're going to approach this. And we realized that the how, came after the why. Why are we doing this? Are we doing it because we are assigned to do it? Check the box. We came in, we did the assessment, and we did the recovery strategy, and we left. That's not our role. And from an EDA standpoint, we look at long-term economic vitality. So long-term economic vitality post-disaster actually makes us look not only to the present, but to the past. And maybe we don't have those fundamentals, and we have to step back, build the fundamentals so we can leap forward. So that's basically what we did from a EDA standpoint. We looked at where, from a federal government, where were those pillars that were absent? How do we either create it, support it, improve it, catalyze it, mentor it? We looked at every single thing to realize what was the level of capacity that we were working with. So from an EDA standpoint, we provided that financial support to those areas that needed that element of step back, build up in order to create something that when you look at recovery plans, they all have this aspirational concept and have the premise that the foundation is there. So when we looked at going back, not everybody has the humbleness to say, hey, we have to step back. We were not going in the right direction, or maybe we were going in the right direction when we made that decision 10 years ago. But the scenario that we have with technology, with everything that's moving forward in different directions, the opportunity has shifted. The threats have shifted. So when we looked at sea level rise, when we look at climate adaptation, climate change, risk mitigation, the financial environment in which also is constantly evolving. So what we needed to do from a government standpoint was listen to the community, go ground level. There's a great difference between needs and wants. And there's an educational component that we need to basically push forward. And it's not about the government coming in with a silver bullet, here we go, and pump money to make sure that we address the current situation. From a government standpoint, there are multiple agencies doing multiple things, and everybody crowds in those big problems or big issues. But there are underlying issues that are not at surface level. And that's where economic development actually happens, mainly to make sure that you have the fundamentals in place to allow economic growth. So from that standpoint, what ADA basically did was look at where were the efforts being put from a big government standpoint and go tactical, go in a small group and do the small little things that, again, ounces make pounds. So we started doing different little elements, the economic development zones, which on the federal government, we call them economic development districts. How is the government structured? Maybe we have a lot of little towns, but again, individually they're siloed and they're looking for the benefit of their own community. But when we look at it as a region, it has critical mass. And maybe the solution is right next door, but they're fighting for the same elements. We have this upcoming opportunity to do interjurisdictional economic development district between U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. That's mainly one of the big elements that we're looking at from scalability, is that we did a pilot project in Puerto Rico, in the southern end of Puerto Rico, and developed a framework that right now that is in the process of getting the designation. But we're already moving into an interjurisdictional economic development district between Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. Why? Because Virgin Islands, it's 3 separate islands, one government. From a regional standpoint, they're a region themselves. So from a theoretical standpoint, they're not a region. They are a single element. So attaching it to Puerto Rico, it's not that Puerto Rico is better or that Virgin Islands is better, it's that now I have a region. Now I have 3 islands with limited population. And then I have in Puerto Rico, I also have a couple of islands that are municipalities. Now we start blending. There's a concept of Jones Act. There's a trade restriction for Puerto Rico, which is not necessarily in Virgin Islands. They have a waiver. So by connecting something sort of like an economic development district in Virgin Islands with economic ties to Puerto Rico, you have 2 major international airports in Virgin Islands, and you have a former naval base in Puerto Rico that faces Virgin Islands. So it all just makes sense from a 36,000 feet point of view, but it needs ground level efforts to make it work. So again, this is an exercise of interdependencies that we're looking at, and I'm going to go directly into the blue economy. Fish aggregating devices, FADs. They're used to basically bring ecosystems closer to the shore so that pelagic fish can find food closer to the shore. And you might just look at this from a fisherman's standpoint or a fisherman's solution, but that has a ripple effect. As you move those fish or pelagic fish closer to the shore, that means that the fishermen have to go in a less or to a closer distance, meaning that they have to burn less fuel to actually get catch, hence lowering carbon footprint. That's one end. The other end is that by doing that, you improve the sports anglers industry, which de facto improves the tourism. So now you're basically having this economic driver, but it's driven by the fish aggregating devices. The fish aggregating devices need the permit from the government to actually be deployed. So how do I deploy them? Well, I need the equipment. So that's where the federal government comes in and provides the equipment so that they can basically do that. But who pays for that? So now you have the private sector pushing money into the nonprofits deploying the fish aggregating devices with federal permits and local government permits, and stimulating the local economy in gastronomy, tourism, entertainment, and whatnot. So we're looking at this from a really intricate interdependency network, but we realized that we did not have the equipment to actually deploy the FADs. So looking at those small little elements that might not be media catching or trendy or whatnot, it actually has a direct impact and creates the first ripple of that ripple effect that we're looking for.
Cool. Thank you, Juan. I think that was the perfect kind of frame that you gave us for this work. And I think these kind of tangible examples of activities that can be brought forward are so meaningful to attach is kind of frameworks of like these big frameworks of like trust and transformation and teams and like, and then you can do this. So Calandra, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, Beth, you asked about scalability. And what Juan is describing is really looking at a granular level as to what pieces of infrastructure need to be included in order to achieve the greater vision, right? And I think a lot of times when communities take this kind of a challenge on, they're looking at the big picture, but they forget about the really granular on the ground pieces that need to be implemented, like Juan was just describing, that then ultimately can build upon each other and create that ripple effect that, you're taking on one little piece and then creating a much larger whole from that. And from a data perspective, we're looking at very specifically, these are the industries that Puerto Rico wants to support that are already on the ground but need to be scaled. And what then are the degrees that need to be graduated, and how can we track and benchmark those? What are the jobs that maybe exist today but have transferable skills and could be elevated to a different level by helping to create and support some of these other ecosystems? And how do we track and measure that job implementation and the growth of jobs, the growth of new industries coming in? What other industries are created? Juan mentioned tourism and gastronomy and other services that are then needed to support new people coming into the economy. And so, how many small businesses are being created over time to support this infrastructure, and how do you measure that? What are the different impacts on the overall socioeconomic framework across Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands? What is the impact on, the median wage and housing costs and health infrastructure, right? So there are all of these different elements that we're measuring and tracking through transparent data, again, to inform how investors' dollars are being used wisely. And I think also you tend to look at something like coral restoration as an environmental impact, right? And something that's important for the ocean. But in fact, coral restoration and many of the other elements that are being implemented in Puerto Rico now protects the built environment, protects the hotels, protects the housing, right? So it protects road infrastructure. So that one small element of coral restoration, which Juan can go into more detail, but they're doing 3D printing and other incredibly innovative and technology solutions to implement in Puerto Rico in kind of groundbreaking work. That supports the built environment, supports real estate investment, supports tourism. So again, looking at these frameworks very holistically, and then how do we track and measure and benchmark those with tools like Statebook and impact rate of return, and transparently report all of that and track it. So I think in terms of risk reduction and the programs that are being implemented, part of, and Juan alluded to this, but part of the whole big picture is how do we create those replicable, scalable manifestations of this recovery and economic transformation that then other island economies and other coastal communities can learn from. And by framing all of it very transparently with the digital tools that are being used, like Statebook and IRR and other elements, that then allows other communities to replicate it, to understand what was done, because it is being tracked and benchmarked over time. And so those impacts are very, very tangible. They're no longer nebulous or anecdotal.
Beth, can I interject something there interestingly?
You absolutely may.
Thank you. Calandra just mentioned the corals and the tangible assets. Well, we gave a grant to Blue Tide to acquire a lot of equipment. One of those equipment was a work/research vessel, a huge catamaran, a 77-foot research vessel. So they've already they received that catamaran in March. Today, they've already deployed 22 fish aggregating devices. On top of deploying those 22 fish aggregating devices, we've been able to visit communities like Culebra. It's an island municipality with 1,200 inhabitants. With that, they were able to bring a lot of fishing equipment to the community. And the feedback that we had from the community is that in over 40 years, everybody has been coming down and doing studies and proposing solutions and a lot of ink on paper. But this was the first time that they actually got something in return, because they were always asked for information, and they were always giving information and relaying information. And a study came out and mentioned them, but nothing tangible. So with that, it's one of those tangible things that we can say, hey, in 3 months, it took us almost 4 years to build it, but in 3 months, we already have tangible results. With the 3D printing, and this is where we actually start weaving the interdependencies. We're looking at creative industries, creative technologies as a hybrid of blue economy. So we're looking at industrial design. Why we're looking at industrial design and artists to help us with the technology in 3D printing. None of them are biologists. None of them are marine biologists or divers or anything. But we've been able to bring that community of tech artists and bring them into a solution that's 3D printing. And 3D printing with clay to make sure that we're ecosystem responsible. And again, this is something as of a week ago, we were looking at it from a habitat restoration, coral restoration initiative. This week, when we visited Culebra, they looked at the features, the fishermen, not the marine biologists and not the industrial engineers. They were looking at it as a tool to help on the breeding of lobsters. Why? Because the little holes that they had designed, they needed to put them upside down, so the little lobster babies, they go through 7 different stages of molting, but they need a place to actually hide. And those designs needed to be modified. So we left prototypes with them, And now we're basically looking at what started as a coral restoration or habitat restoration for coastal threat mitigation actually has become a multifaceted industry interdependent effort. Why? Because we're engaging with the university, not with the marine biology or the marine sciences, but we're engaging with the artists, with the materials engineer, with the architects, with the designers, and building this. The result of being able to do this right impacts the insurance company. Why? Because if we implement this the right way, there's a risk reduction on the coast. And again, all of the things that we're working with, it's a dynamic interdependency exercise. And that's why your team or the team that you build has to be built in looking at things in motion, not a snapshot in time in which you start working the solution and 10 years later you have a solution of a problem that it's no longer a problem. And the solution does not necessarily adapt to it. This public-private partnership allows us to have different aspects of visibility of what does this mean for economic growth? What does this mean for the community? What does this mean for public policy? And all this is in real time, in motion, and implementation. So, sorry, Calandra, I just needed to add that. Nice.
I can see myself and Calandra and David all nodding and probably have eagerly thinking of things that we'd like to add in here.
I have a couple of things I have to add, Beth.
Oh.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have a couple of things that are critically important. So we're all U.S. based, and it's easy to talk in terms that people in the U.S. understand, but we have an international audience from around the world. So just a couple of things to a couple of points of clarification that might be helpful. Juan talked about economic development districts, and that's a concept that is affiliated with the U.S. Economic Development Administration, in which they support the creation of regional economic development organizations. And that is very important, not only in the U.S., but to every country, that you understand the concept of regional growth and regional, the advantages of regional. And Juan spoke eloquently to that. The second thing is, when we're talking about the title of the session is the align the SDGs with economic recovery and resilience. Of course, SDG 14, and Juan is all about SDG 14, as he should be with this. But this impacts many other of the sustainable development goals. As you can imagine, I'm not going to insult everyone's intelligence by making those direct linkages, but you can see how they impact health, they impact economic prosperity, they impact the ecosystem of the ocean and all of those things. The third thing is that I feel is really important to point out, and again, part of the genius of this effort, and this came from Juan, and Juan said, well, we need to build capacity in the NGO community. And I said, for what? He said, if we're going to have a robust blue economy effort, we have to have innovation and entrepreneurship as a part of that. And the NGO community in Puerto Rico has great people, but they haven't been trained in how to act as a catalyst for entrepreneurship and innovation. So Juan brought in a renowned international firm, Creative Startups, to train these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, in how to do that. And so, again, it's a part of his view of an ecosystem. He's looking at all of these different components. And, the title of the entire conference is COP26, is mitigation and adaptation, right? Reducing CO2 and adapting to the changing climate. Well, this is masterful in accomplishing both, because Juan talked about the coral and the protection that it provides. That is adaptation, right? Increasing the health of the coral reefs around Puerto Rico. But there's also other activities that are spurred on by that, including the growth of of kelp and seagrass, which have proven to be more effective than trees in removing CO2 from the atmosphere. So again, this is a multifaceted approach. It is replicable. That was from day one. The idea was that this could be taken, and Blue Tide Puerto Rico, being the NGO that is the catalyst for this, could work with other island nations and coastal nations anywhere in the world. So that was all I wanted to say. Again, I'm sorry to interrupt, Beth, but I thought it was really critical that we clarify those things.
I appreciate that, David. So I want to go back, Calandra, a bit ago, you were talking about the transparency of data and how critical that has been. And I've heard, Juan, you really talking about the necessity to be thinking forward. And I work in climate change. It's been my career space, and thinking about climate change adaptation. Often there is a challenge, one, in data transparency, but also what is sometimes phrased as overcoming uncertainty. And this certainly comes in as we think about a dynamic, changing climate, and it can stymie action. The uncertainty can stymie us from even stepping forward. And I just would love for each of you to talk about how the transparency of the data has been helpful in overcoming that barrier, and also the way which you have tackled uncertainty to still move forward to such incredible implementation.
So I'll start with just saying, and Juan and David and I talk about this not infrequently, that Puerto Rico has some reputational hurdles to overcome, right? So in terms of transparency and data-driven approach, and it's not alone in that, right? I mean, the U.S. federal government faces some of those challenges. Other economies all over the world face those challenges. There are corruption reputations that have to be overcome all over the world, and they're in Puerto Rico specifically, they're just addressing it head on, right? So they're not trying to obfuscate anything. They're coming to the table with transparent data. They're making it an open source, open book, digital platform for anybody to come in and take a look at and examine what they're doing, the impact, how the dollars are being spent, what the return on investment is. And that's incredibly laudable, but it also, again, creates that framework for future economies to look at that and understand how it was built, what the pitfalls were, where does the data show very transparently that something didn't work, and where does it show that it did work, and how do we pivot from there? In technology, there's a term called agile development, and in agile development, you do things in little pieces so that for each piece that is built and launched, you can quickly pivot if something doesn't work. And that's the approach that Puerto Rico is taking with this framework. And it's, I think the other piece of that is Juan mentioned that this is a living organism, right? It's an economy in motion, and it's being approached that way. So it's not a moment in time that we're looking at. We're tracking and benchmarking every step of the way with always up-to-date data. And what that achieves is that, like Juan mentioned in Culebra, you're not going in and asking for information. You're actually looking at that information and creating tangible, replicable solutions to address the challenges. And in the work that Statebook does with communities all over the US, we frequently see nonprofits, very well-intentioned research organizations, consulting groups come to the table and sit down, do a big analysis and say, okay, here are all of your issues. Let us just outline them for you. And then they walk away and everybody says, yeah, we knew that, but what we wanted were solutions. How do we fix it? And so this project is actually taking the opposite approach. The analysis has been done for decades, right? There's a deep understanding of where a lot of the hurdles are and the challenges are. But what this project is doing is coming to the table with active, tangible solutions that are being implemented on the ground and then are therefore very replicable because of how it's being tracked and benchmarked. And so I think in doing that, they're creating kind of a groundbreaking standard for island economies and any economy really to be able to address the challenges that they're facing and provide the solutions and then track that, learn, pivot along the way as needed. And, you know, Juan mentioned just looking at the coral 3D printing and, oh, we need to flip that over so that the baby lobsters have a habitat, right? So, and how does that affect the built environment and, you know, the insurance companies and the real estate investors, right? So it's very holistic, it's very approachable, and it's something that is easily replicable.
And Calandra, I wanted to add to that because I think it wraps it up. We tend to avoid paralysis by analysis, which basically we kind of delve into that. Let's analyze. Let's research. But what's being implemented? And that's like, for example, this same issue with Culebra. That happened 2 days ago. When we came back, we basically talked with the designing team. It's like, hey, if we're gonna do the little plugs or the little holes, let's do one up, one down, one up, one down, so that we incorporate that information in real time, and the next prototype that comes out within a week or so actually has that element integrated. It's not an issue of let's start analyzing over analytics, over data, over what happens. No, let's do it.
So we have a question, and David, I haven't forgotten that you get to have some reflections and wrap up too here, but I've got to ask this other question, which is, you know, we had teed up to talk about trust and trust building. And I just hear you, you know, again, I've been working in adaptation. I came out of a university setting before coming to a network of practitioners. And we often talk about co-production. So how do we produce research with community? And so I want to ask you a question about trust, but I want to ask you, you know, who and how did you drive this research business community to listen to the community? Because they've been forced to put their trust right in that community. And I will also say that I often say trust is a misnomer, because in trust, both sides need to have vulnerability. And here it looks like there's a real team and a force that is empowering that community, the lobster fishermen, that to say, no, we have wisdom and knowledge and you will follow it. So how have you been able to achieve that? Because I find it remarkable.
It's a challenge when you're tasked with doing something bold and not necessarily, and again, you will never be able to come in and please everybody. So one of the cool things about building trust, it's come to the table with something. And I was asked before the trip to Culebra, and it's like, why are the fishermen supposed to trust you? We've been, it's the battered dog syndrome. Hey, you're not the first one to come and promise. So come with a solution. Again, like Calandra said, this has been researched. Come with a solution on hand. Bring the olive branch. Say, hey, I don't come here to take. I'm coming here to bring. And when you bring, the dynamics shift in a heartbeat. It was the first time I engaged with a fisherman. But and again, public-private partnership. Banco Popular, a local large bank in Puerto Rico, gave a small grant to Blue Tide so that Blue Tide could do an assessment and identify the needs. And we were able to bring those resources to the community without asking the community directly. And we brought in, we didn't bring in, we were brought in by local stakeholders, which we had been working with, not as a whole community. And we didn't go in to plant a flag. We just bring in, here's what we come to provide. We want to be a resource and an enabler. We don't want to take away from you. We don't want to do a research about you. We want to be part of the solution with you. But the first thing to build that trust, it's bring something, and bring something that they have said that they needed for a long time.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I would add also Howard Buffett's impact rate of return, that framework includes both looking at the dollars that are allocated to the project, the time that is estimated to achieve impact, and then the actual quality of the impact delivered. And part of that framework is actually going down on the ground with interviews and surveys for the local community. There's that expression that I love, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. So, listen more than you speak, right? And really understand where the gaps are and listen to the people on the ground about what they actually need, as opposed to even what the research tells you, right? Because to Juan's very opening statement, it may be very different. And so I think there is a lot of that going on. And again, that's part of the agile framework of, let's ask the questions, let's understand what's happening, let's propose the solutions, and then listen to the reaction to that and adapt as needed. So I think building that trust, to your point, Beth, is vulnerability on both sides, and not being afraid, not coming in, which this project doesn't at all in any way, to say, we already know what you need, let us tell you how it's going to be. It's very much a listening exercise. We're here to learn together, kind of framework. And so I think that's very, very important. And it builds that trust with the local fishermen, with the local sole proprietorships, with, the big university institutions and the insurance companies and the investors, all coming together in dynamic ways that has never really been done before.
So David, I want to hand this to you, because as we talked about before this session, you've lived this story, you've heard this story, but I'm sure for you today there were things that jumped out that you may have heard new or heard anew that you want to make sure that we reiterate. And obviously you've been throughout the week at the conference. So if you could help us to, what really stands out to you, and what is the message that you want to make sure that folks who are here with us are taking away. And you're muted right now, so do it off mute.
I know there are many people that really like it when I'm on mute, but we've heard so many different innovations in PPPs, and especially relating to climate adaptation and mitigation over the week. I mean, it's been an incredible amount of knowledge imparted. I think that, again, this initiative, these efforts are somewhat unique in that they, again, take the ecosystem approach of bringing all of these different factors together, that they include, both national and international efforts, but also really focus on building local capacity. And that's one thing. And someone asked a question, one of the participants asked a question about levels of disaster response. And my response was that you must have a very well constructed and thought out method of response, and that's emergency management, and that's a global term for the people that come in, the first responders that come in right after as a disaster is occurring, and then right after, and set the stage for recovery. So you have to have that. You have to have a very, very robust recovery effort to put things back in place. But no longer is that enough. Because of climate change, we have to recover better, or build back better is the term. And again, that's a universal term. And then in doing that, and as a result of that, we integrate resilience, which is disaster risk reduction and sustainability, and these elements of innovation in ensuring that the recovery is going to make that place, that affected area, that affected region, that affected country stronger and more apt to resist and recover more rapidly from the next disaster, the next disruptive event. So, and the world right now is besieged with disruptive events, not just natural disasters, but other things that we all know about. And this is all encompassed in the effort to adapt. We have to adapt to whatever environment is thrown at us. So from my perspective, this approach, taking this comprehensive ecosystem-driven approach, looking at building capacity, looking at attracting investment in resilience building activities, and then the accompanying economic activity, an economic, a robust economic situation is a resilience. You know, we talk about that with people. Strengthening the economy strengthens resilience. So again, I'm thinking that this approach should be looked at, should be studied. We're all available for follow-on questions from the group, and I know that I myself have viewed recordings of the sessions that I couldn't see live. And so if you're watching this as a recording, please don't hesitate. You can reach out to us because we all three of us have, and you too, Beth, we all have the same affliction. We desperately want to help make this world a little more safe, a little more able to deal with all of the things that are being thrown at us right now. So I think that's kind of my summary about this.
I appreciate that, David. And I have one more question for Juan and Calandra, and then I'll ask for each of you to give us your kind of closing thoughts on this. And I'm going to take us back to Juan, where you started out and you said something which I think is important for all of us to hear and to recognize that, the disasters are with us. We are in this. We are in the state of change, but disasters can have a silver lining, and that is the recovery. You and the dynamic team that you've built there have been driving an incredible recovery post-Maria. But we know, obviously, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and many other places still lay in harm's way. So what is the foundation that you feel like is there today that wasn't before Maria, that's going to be able to keep your recovery and to really build the resilience of Puerto Rico that you've been able to secure against the next storm? Like that kind of foundational piece that you might offer up for those who are listening.
Thanks, Beth. And I think David was the one that brought it up. We've been able to work on strengthening the nonprofit sector. They're the first responder. That nonprofit sector has a myriad of funding sources, but we need to make sure that they're able and capable of managing and securing those funds in a timely manner. You have the philanthropy, you have the funders, the donors that react really fast. You have the government that's kind of sluggish. It deploys the money, everybody announces the money, but then the compliance component drags that money to be put where it's supposed to go. So strengthen the nonprofit sector. And again, this is kind of that risk reduction or economic resilience, is help build that nonprofit sector so that nonprofit can react faster to disasters, and communicating that they have to be cognizant that this is not a silo-based recovery in any instance. This is an interdependent ecosystem that basically relies on all the moving parts moving at the same time.
I really appreciate that one. And I just have really been struck by that story of being able to do two things at once, which is kind of drive to action and implementation while maintaining a holistic and really systems thinking approach. I think these are not things that can be set up in opposition, though often we act like they are. And so Calandra, I know that so much of being able to do that kind of systems thinking down to implementation comes back to the data. And so for folks, again, who are here, how would they engage with you with a statebook? And what are kind of the steps that they should be thinking about taking to be preparing their own PPPs and their own communities as we're thinking about this intersection of finance and climate risk?
Yeah, I think, Beth, as you mentioned, it's holistic, it's systematic, it's an ecosystem. Nothing in this, in order to be successful, you can't have silos, right? It has to be dynamic, it has to be interactive. In terms of the data and how that can help, it's all about the execution of it. It's a very small investment. It's a very, very tiny piece of this puzzle is bringing together the data in a framework like Statebook can provide, because we've already aggregated all of the data, at least for the US, right? So we track and measure everything for the entire country, across workforce, taxes, infrastructure, supply chain, quality of life, education, health, housing, utility rates, weather, pollution, all of these different pieces, right? All of the elements that come together to inform the strategy and the ecosystem that needs to be built. And when you're taking all of that information and then making it transparently available to anyone who wants to come in and take a look at it, that's where you're then telling investors, Juan mentioned attracting investment. It's a huge piece of it, right? And any public-private partnership, it's going to be the glue that enables all of the rest of it to happen, is the investment piece, right? And so by being able to very transparently report and track what is happening on the ground and where the dollars are going, and using a framework like impact rate of return to be able to deliver those results and track it in a dynamic fashion, I think it's really important. And it also speaks to just the fact that we are in these natural disaster cycles, right? And other pandemics, wars, there's all kinds of impacts on our economies right now that are generating a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And data can help be the framework that pulls that all together, that de-risks it, that creates the foundation for the future growth and the future resilience going forward. But it's also I think that uncertainty has also led to an emerging sector of investment in impact investment, which is looking at a long-term, sustainable, resilient way to deploy dollars in these kinds of holistic ecosystems like Puerto Rico is implementing now.
Well, I have to say, we are coming up on the time for the top of this session. We want to make sure that folks are able to get to their to the final session, which is the awards banquet. And I think that note on where do we head from here? What does impact investing mean? How do we use that as a tool for long-term sustainable ways of development? Is a session, I think it's probably a session for our next conference. So hopefully somebody's writing down, what do we need to come back to get more of? So I want to open it up. I have learned so much from each of you, Calandra, David, Juan. I'm incredibly inspired by the work that you've discussed, by the teams that you've convened, by the action that has been actualized. And so any closing comments, final thoughts that you'd like to share with the community here?
Seems like we're all good, Beth.
I know. Incredible. So I want to thank you all for being here, Juan, David, Calandra, and I want to thank the World Association for Public-Private Partnership Professionals for hearing this conversation, and look forward to seeing folks over at the awards session, which will begin in just 9 minutes. So grab your coffee or your cocktail, and we will see you there.
Thank you.
Thank you so